Good evening, fellow Herdsurfers. Today, we are very excited to be interviewing Mr. Cedric Bosch. In his very recent Kickstarter campaign, Cedric raised over $83,000 for the production of a Rideye camera, which is essentially a black box for your bicycle. Cedric will tell us all about the production of his device, as well as the overall success of his campaign. Cedric, thank you very much for joining us here this evening. Cedric, so you are basically 2 weeks since your campaign. How do you feel about how it went?
Well, it took a while to come down from it. Honestly, it was such a rush during those 35 days that there were just so many questions coming from different people and so many different requests for press and that kind of stuff that in the days following it kind of immediately shuts off. And it's all it's all, what are you going to do from now? So it was an interesting transition, but I took a couple days to kind of relax and pretty much immediately jumped into manufacturing, taking off where I had left off earlier. But also there were a lot of just general questions to answer and technical details to take care of.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your background. How long have you been riding bicycles? Are you part of like a club or a bicycle team?
Mm-hmm. So I started riding bikes in high school. It was 12 miles each way. It was pretty far. So I got a job at a bike shop because I found the mechanics really interesting. And from there I just got into road racing. I did a lot of mountain bike racing. I raced for the college team, University of Arizona, where I went to school.
Nice.
I got pretty into it. I was pretty competitive at that time, and then it kind of tapered off because engineering got harder. And then when I got this job, I was able to start training again. I actually just did a race this past weekend. I did a double century. It was 197 miles, I think, in Death Valley, which was really
wow.
Good. It was like 13 hours and just grueling, but
nice.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to get into right now. Is more like long distance events.
Long distance events. That's awesome. So you said you just recently got a job that allows you to kind of focus on racing as well as the production of Rideye.
Well, kind of. I mean, so what I'm doing now is I'm working for a research and development firm out here in Los Angeles. The job I'm at now. It basically lets me. It's just a regular full-time job, but the scheduling allows me to work on these kinds of projects after work and I just kind of take some time to work on this kind of stuff. Honestly, it's really been consuming all of my free time, but that's how I like it. So it's been going really well.
That's excellent. Where did you get the idea for Rideye? How did the idea develop?
Sure. Yeah. So the story goes, and I've actually told this story a million times now, just because of the press is always really interested in the story behind the product. But it's actually interesting. My friend in college, we were both riding buddies, and one day he was out for a ride by himself, and he was hit by a car. And it ended up being a hit and run. The car left the scene, and so he was stuck on the side of the road until an ambulance came and picked him up.
Wow.
So after that, I got to thinking, how can we avoid this from happening again? It's kind of becoming an epidemic for cyclists, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And I just started thinking of different ways, and it seemed like recording your ride continuously seemed like the right thing to do. So I got to working on essentially a special type of device, a black box, that would work for cyclists.
Okay. When did you actually start, putting this idea together, kind of developing it?
Probably exactly a year ago.
A year ago.
Or about a year ago, and then in January, February, I started doing the hard engineering work. The layout for the board and the mechanicals, that kind of stuff.
Have you been creating the prototypes by yourself, or were there other people helping you out as well?
It's been great. I mean, the people that I work with are very knowledgeable, and they've given me a lot of advice. Mm-hmm. But yeah, all of the work has been done by myself. It's actually, nowadays, it's really easy to produce something like this. There's a lot of resources online to help you get started. I did this a while back, but just to help you get started in electronics and programming, and I majored in mechanical engineering, so I had that part. But it's become a lot easier for kind of a garage inventor like myself to bring something like this to market.
Would you mind sharing some of those resources that you mentioned? Like some of those online websites.
Yeah. So a lot of my friends come to me and they're like, Cedric, I want to get into electronics, or I want to start making robots or something like that. It used to be you had to be like a hardcore electrical engineer and really have a lot of resources at your disposal. But nowadays you can buy like an Arduino. I'm sure you've heard of that. It's a little microcontroller board. And you go online and there's hundreds of example projects that, there's tutorials for, and it's just really easy to get started. A lot of the projects that you see on Kickstarter actually, when you start talking to people, they say, yeah, like I got started with Arduino, or I got started with any of these kind of open source development kits.
Okay.
And now, and that kind of spurred me to come up with the idea that I'm pitching now.
Okay, nice. So actually, Rideye is a one-man team. You're handling the marketing, the campaign, and then also the design?
Yeah, everything has been myself so far.
Wow.
I'm foreseeing having to bring in an electrical engineer to help me out with some of the more complex board design. There's a concept called DFM, which is Design for Manufacturing, and it refers to taking a concept or a product which you have designed and actually making it manufacturable. So in this case, I have circuit boards which are totally acceptable. They work great, except they might be a little bit large, where I could maybe shave off a couple inches on one or two sides, or not inches, millimeters at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those costs add up in large quantities, and it becomes economical to hire a professional to help you out with those kinds of things.
Kind of make it the smallest size possible. I mean, we saw your
Right.
prototypes on Kickstarter, and then we'll talk about the video later on, but it also looks great. It's a very good video, and it basically takes the viewer through the entire process of manufacturing your device, step by step. Okay. So prior to Kickstarter, how have you been funding this project? Is it just basically bootstrapping?
Yeah, it's all been bootstrapped, actually. To be honest, I think that this is one of the better ways to start a company or a business is through Kickstarter, because your initial investment is so incredibly low. Like, I've put in, probably $1,500 of my own money.
Wow.
And that's all gone towards getting boards made, getting prototype parts. Companies will send you parts for free if you ask for samples, in hopes that you end up using them for higher manufacturing quantities.
Mm-hmm.
The website, hosting is a couple bucks a month.
Right.
But the real, and the reason that figure is so low is because I haven't valued my own time. It's just something that I've done out of passion. So it's, I've put in, hundreds of hours.
Right.
My life after work has been this project. But it's great because Kickstarter lets you prove an idea and prove to yourself that people are interested in it before you have to go off and actually get stuff manufactured.
Right, absolutely. So it validates your idea prior to you actually investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into it. Okay.
Yeah, which is what it used to be. You had to come up with an idea, and you didn't want to share it because you didn't want people to copy you. So you went and got it manufactured, got it on store shelves, and then it either sold or it didn't, and then you were kind of out of luck if it didn't. But yeah. Kickstarter lets you take the risk out of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tell us, we've seen your video, we know how your device works. For the audience that hasn't seen the video, tell us a little bit about the product and how it operates, especially the crash detection sensor. How does that work?
Yeah, that's one of the key features. So Rideye is, like you said, it's a product specifically designed for cyclists to keep you safe on the roads. It records high definition video in a continuous, never-ending loop. So you basically have this device on your bike, which you hit a button once, it turns on, and then it's a set and forget type thing. You don't have to worry about it. It just sits there and does its thing until the day that you do get in a crash. You can pull footage, from it and show what happened, which is usually very important. So a couple of key features that it has are that loop recording functionality. You don't have to worry about the memory card being full. It has incredibly long battery life. 24 hours is what we've targeted and we're able to achieve. And that's in contrast to the 2 or 3 hours that other cameras on the market will get you. And then finally, like you said, crash detection sensors. The way those work is we have an accelerometer in the device which continuously measures the orientation as well as the acceleration of the camera. So with that information and with a ton of testing and calibration and different algorithms, we can, when you have the movement of a device, you can tell what kind of forces it's been subjected to.
Right.
And at that point, you can decide, is this significant enough of a force to say, yes, we have been involved in a crash. And at that point, you can do, a bunch of different behaviors, flag video, that kind of stuff.
Okay, got it. Now, you had a contribution package where it included actually the front as well as the rear,
Right.
2 cameras there. Would those work in sync, kind of, or would they operate separately?
Right, that's a great question. So we did some, and actually that was a reward that was introduced later into the project, about a week in. I was hoping to do it initially, but Kickstarter has a policy where they don't allow multiples.
Right.
They have that whole "we're not a store" post.
Exactly.
And they don't want to sell multiples. So I sent him an email saying, I sent Kickstarter a message and asked, we've had a bunch of people request a type of front and rear combo pack. Can we do it? And they said sure. We did some research initially, and we found that 70% of bicycle accidents happen from the front, whether it be somebody pulling out in front of you or somebody making a left turn or that kind of thing. So we figured that most people would be interested in just having a front camera, since that protects you from most incidents. And even in the cases where it is a rear collision, you can still show what kind of behavior you were having before the accident. So the combo pack just let us provide full coverage to the people who wanted it, and it ended up actually being very popular.
Okay, nice. Getting on the subject of Kickstarter, when did you first become aware of the website and the whole crowdfunding movement?
Yeah. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I think it was either the Formlabs printer or the Pebble watch. And it's interesting, a lot of people kind of criticize these large, mega blockbuster Kickstarter projects, like some celebrities have done movie fundraising, or some already established companies have gone to Kickstarter to do a round of investment.
Right.
And I actually think it's great because it brings people who have never heard of the site to Kickstarter, and it lends a certain credibility to it. I would certainly have never heard about it if it was only, really small hobbyist project. So it was, I think, like most people, I heard about it through some type of huge project that showed up on Engadget or something like that.
Okay, nice. And have you heard of other crowdfunding platforms such as Indiegogo, Rocket Launch, I think?
Yeah, there's one called Plausible that's Australia only that I've backed a few projects on. But yeah, I think Indiegogo. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead with Indiegogo.
Yeah, Indiegogo has. I feel like they're less credible of a platform. They have a new feature now called flexible funding, which lets you collect money that's been raised regardless of whether the goal has been met.
Right.
And a lot of those projects seem really sketchy. They're just kind of like renders and vaporware. And I know for a fact that a lot of them have been totally legit and successful, but for some reason it seems like the more legitimate projects end up on Kickstarter.
Yeah, it does seem that way, that Kickstarter really does their homework in allowing, specific projects and maybe giving others a much more difficult time to apply. Did you have any difficulties getting onto Kickstarter? Were they pretty prompt in their responses?
That's a good question. Let me think back. Yeah, I think 2 questions that they asked before they approved my project. The first was, can you post more technical content? Which I was surprised by. I had withheld a lot of that just because I thought it would be intimidating for some non-technical people. So I was glad to post, the pictures of the internals and the prototypes, and they really liked that. And then they also asked for, I only had, and this actually ended up being great advice. Like, they actually really try to help you out because, eventually they take 10% of it. Right. So it's not all altruistic, but they do give you some good suggestions. I only had 2 or 3 rewards. I had the merchandise stuff, and I had the Rideye camera itself. Mm-hmm. And they said, consider adding some higher value ones, some type of special Kickstarter edition. So I took a couple days and I added those pledges, and they ended up being really successful as well.
Yeah, we noticed that you had the limited production, I think it was 50 of the Kickstarter edition. Okay, so you've been working on that as well, and that one was a little bit higher, more expensive than the other ones as well.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to my friend about this, and we had done a bunch of research on other projects, and I found that a few projects did kind of a limited edition, Kickstarter only, for a premium, and people love to show their support. People who use Kickstarter in general are really aware of trends, and they love to back, up and coming projects, and something like that, something like a Kickstarter only version gives them, a way to really show off that they've supported a project and gone the extra mile.
Right, absolutely. And, how did you kind of become familiar with the whole crowdfunding concept as well, and also Kickstarter? How did you become knowledgeable in that subject?
A few people have done some really intimate, like, self-analysis of their own campaigns. Mm-hmm. A lot of the independent game and board game and video game projects have done some really great articles. Mostly, though, I just went and made a list of projects that were similar to mine, and I went and read the updates. I read their blogs if they had them. I went through and read the comments that people had posted just to get a good grip on what people expected when they went into a campaign to back it. Mm-hmm. So really, I just tried to emulate the best practices that I found in other successful campaigns.
Okay, were there any campaigns in particular that our audience should look at as successful examples?
I'll send you a link that you can put in the description later, but there are definitely some really good sites that they should take a look at.
Okay, any blogs that you read maybe prior that you could think of?
Yeah, they're kind of like a multi-part series blog. It's been a while since I've taken a look at them.
No, I understand.
Initial research stuff,
when did you start planning it?
So I started planning. I decided that I wanted to do a Kickstarter campaign around March, and that's when I started really heavily researching other projects. I started doing the website first because I realized that you need to have a website as well as a good campaign page.
Right.
And then I started, the video took a really long time. All these things that you're not really familiar with as an engineer or whatever it is that you come to Kickstarter as, you need to familiarize yourself with. So I bought an SLR. I took a bunch of photos. I did the video, that kind of stuff. So it takes a lot of time, but
no, it does.
That's along the way.
Okay, so you did the heavy engineering. I think you mentioned back in February. That's when you started putting the whole project together, the Rideye. And then later in March, that's when you started becoming serious about the Kickstarter campaign. Is that when you kind of applied for it as well? There's a little bit of a...
No, I have... you mean submitted my project for approval?
Yeah.
That was maybe a week before it launched.
Okay.
They really want everything to be in line, and once you get their approval, you can make some minor changes, but you need to be ready to launch pretty much immediately.
Okay, we've heard of people submitting them, their projects, and not really getting a response for a couple weeks, maybe a few months. So I'm just curious when you applied and when you actually launched your campaign.
Yep. That's a good point. I'm on the Kickstarter subreddit a lot on Reddit, and there's been a few kind of horror stories of people not getting a response at all.
Yeah.
So they go on to other platforms. But mine was great. I submitted it on a Thursday, and I got a response on Tuesday or Wednesday following that.
Okay.
So it was very prompt.
Okay, so all the marketing for the campaign, and by the way, who came up with the Rideye name? It's very creative. The design, the logos.
Yeah, that was myself. Yeah.
Nice.
And that was really one of the hardest parts. It took me, weeks of just agonizing over different names and what domains are available so I can afford to buy an expensive domain. And then the logo. I mean, it was just a lot of time and a sketchbook and just playing with ideas and bouncing them off people. So thank you.
Okay.
I found a recent project called I don't remember what it was called, but it's called Lock 8. It's lock with an 8 at the end, and it's a bicycle lock that has like a built-in GPS so you can locate your bike after it's been stolen. And they have a really cool name and logo that you should check out if you want something that's actually
Lock 8.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll definitely look into that. About the video, it has a very simplistic brilliance to it. You don't say too much in it. You say, hey, I'm Cedric, and please support my Kickstarter, and then it's basically just you in the workshop, right?
Yeah. The video was something that I was very intimidated about. I'm the kind of guy who likes to, spend time working in my workshop and just developing stuff. I'm not the kind of person who is out there selling things. So that was really hard for me to figure out what I wanted to do for the video. So I decided to keep it simple and let the product sell itself on its own merit. And I thought people would be interested in how it's made. Personally, I spent a lot of time watching videos of how things are manufactured and kind of behind the scenes. I think is really interesting. So what I wanted to do was give people an insight on how I was making this thing, because I think that's why a lot of people come to Kickstarter and to get kind of the behind the scenes look on the development. So I think that was probably a good idea, because if I had tried to make it any more complex with me talking or any more complicated shots, I was thinking of having staged accidents, but that would have been just a total distraction from the actual goal of the project, which was to get this thing made.
Right. I mean, it really did a good job of explaining the product, what you're all about, and how it's created, which gives it that legitimacy, which you don't really see in a lot of other projects. So.
No, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of projects have excellent videos, and certainly I'm sure that if I had hired a professional PR agency like some of these projects do, I could have maybe raised a little bit more. But honestly, all I was setting out to do was to raise what I had set in my goal, and anything more than that was, it's nice to have, but it's really exactly what I needed for the goal amount that I calculated was what I needed to get the rolling started.
Okay, and that goal, that we mentioned it, was $32,000, I believe?
Yeah, that's right.
What kind of calculations went into that goal?
Yeah, that's actually a really complicated part, and especially with product design or technology-related projects, you really need to have done it before to have any idea of what kind of scale you're looking at. Fortunately, I've worked in a bunch of different places where I've had to do the sourcing process, so I know what kind of vendors to go to and how to negotiate contracts. So basically, I calculated what quantities I was going to be building in.
Mm-hmm.
So my first estimation was 500 units, which ended up actually being much higher because you get a certain number on Kickstarter, but you also get pre-orders through external sources. So, so you take that initial quantity, you go get quotes for every component, and then you add them up, you do a bill of materials, and then you add in extra costs for shipping, for taxes for foreign countries, for just miscellaneous overhead that inevitably happens, and then you come up with that number.
Okay, and then you also have to consider the Kickstarter fee as well as the PayPal
Exactly.
fees as well. Okay, so you reached your goal in like a week, I believe, right? Maybe a few days even.
Yeah, I think it was 4 or 5 days in.
Okay, and going into the campaign, did you know that you'd be, so successful so quickly?
I was actually pretty sure that the project would fail because it was my first attempt
Okay.
at kind of marketing or selling something myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had been, I'm really good at what I do, which is making things, but I had never really tried that, the marketing or sales aspect of it before. So I gave it my best shot. I tried to keep it as simple as possible, and like I said, just let the product sell itself on its own merit. But I was really surprised. But once it started getting successful, I kind of rolled with it and did a bunch of press and kind of tried to fuel that fire.
Okay. Now, what kind of a marketing promotion did you do prior to the campaign, kind of to build up the hype?
Yeah, that's probably one of the things I did wrong. If you look at Kickdraft, you can see a graph of funding progress.
Yes.
And you'll see there's two very distinct types of projects. There's the kind that has a gigantic first day, and then it tapers off after that.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see the kind that's like mine, where it starts off slow and then builds to a peak in the early week and then tapers off, as they all inevitably do. The projects that pass the first day are the ones that do a really good job of getting their product out beforehand. And I wasn't really aware of that before I started this one, so I launched it and then started doing the press pitching, right after the project had launched, maybe a day or two after, and that's when people started to pick up on it. But in reality, bloggers want to be the first one to break a news story. So they're really interested in you pitching your product to them before the campaign actually launches.
Right. And so once your campaign took off, what kind of press releases did you do? Who did you go to?
I wrote up a press release, and I had a press kit with some high resolution photos and some unique content. I wrote a sample story to make it easy for them to write a story. I made a list of all these different cycling blogs that I wanted to pitch to.
Right.
Cycling news websites. I made a list of a bunch of different tech sites that I wanted to pitch to. And I kind of refined the whole package to make it something that's really easy for them to take in, because when you think about it, a blogger is really not there to help you out. They're there to do their job, which is to get a bunch of page views. So if you have an interesting project, they're going to pick up on it and be really interested. But if it's something that's really hard to present or something that they don't think is going to have a wide appeal, they're just going to ignore it.
Okay. So when did you start rolling out the PR releases? Like day 4, day 3? Like, why were you so successful on day 5?
I think that's when I started doing the pitching, was day 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it takes them a day or two to do an article. I think the Friday after we launched, that's when I did the segment with the local ABC station, which was really helpful. And that was something that they reached out to me and said, hey, we noticed your project and that you're from Los Angeles and we'd like to do the story on you. So that was really helpful. We got the Mashable article, the CNET was right around that time. Just a lot of big articles that just drive a lot of traffic. But I missed out on some of the bigger websites like Engadget and The Verge and just some of the really massive tech sites. And I'm not sure if that's because the project, the product is kind of more of a limited appeal than the smartwatch, for example, or if it's just because those sites really demand to be the first ones to break a story, which I think it's actually the latter, because I've seen some projects that kind of have a narrower scope even than mine, but just because they allow those large sites to break a story first, they get that big coverage. So, but like I said, I mean, it's the amount of money that I raised is more than what I anticipated. and it's great to see the support is there. But really, the goal was to fund the first round of production and then grow it into something bigger after that.
Right. So, just to backtrack a little bit, ABC News, they actually approached you. You didn't approach them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But what about Mashable?
All the other sites, 100% of the sites that were articles, that wrote articles, sorry, were pitched by me.
Okay, got it.
I don't think there was a single site that wrote an article, a single major site that wrote an article on their own will. It was just me sending them requests and saying, you know, I'll do anything if you need questions answered or special photos, I'd be happy to provide that. You really have to be very aggressive.
Right. So the takeaway point there can be is you have to be aggressive and you have to actually kind of pitch your product to those blogs in order to get the press releases.
Yeah, you have to be incredibly aggressive and really have good timing. Tuesday is a good day to pitch stuff because it just gives you some time to follow up during the rest of the week.
Okay.
But yeah, you need to be incredibly aggressive to get picked up by those kinds of sites.
Okay. So we talked about the contribution packages a little bit, the reward packages. You had, I believe, 8 different ones, and initially you only had 3. As far as the merchandise ones, where you offer, I believe, a T-shirt as well as a water bottle, was there like a local shop that you teamed up with, or was this like done through an online website affiliated with Kickstarter? We've seen a few of those.
Yeah, there are a few, and it's interesting actually. Once you launch a project, you basically get bombarded with offers from companies saying, you know, hey, like we want to make the T-shirt for you, or we want to make the bottles for you, stuff like that. But I had established those prior. Yeah, everything was done here in California. The T-shirt printing and the T-shirt manufacturing even is done in downtown LA, and then the bottles are done by Specialized Bicycles up in Morgan Hill, California. But yeah, so, I mean, that was a relatively minor part, but I think that having merchandise lets people who want to contribute less than the total amount give something and get something in return.
Right.
And a lot of the merchandise sales was from people who said, you know, hey, I'm not a cyclist, I don't have a bike, but I really like the concept, so here's, you know, a little bit of money to help you out, and send them a T-shirt in exchange.
Right. Okay. So your period of time for crowdfunding was 35 days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you have a full-time job, it seems like, and then you also like cycling as a hobby. You know, how did you balance all 3?
Well, so first of all, the duration is an interesting question to bring up. That was kind of an arbitrary number. I had read that 30 days was the most successful duration, and then I told myself, you know, I'll probably need a little bit more time, so I'll do 35. Looking back, I should have probably done 40 or 45. They say that if it's your first campaign, you should take a little bit more time because it's going to take you some time to get stuff figured out. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you don't want like a 90-day campaign because then there's no sense of urgency. You know,
right.
People kind of say, oh, 90 days, I'll just come back to it in a month and see if I still want it, and then they forget about it.
So you actually wish you would have done a longer campaign, looking back on it?
I don't think it would have made a huge difference, but if I had to give someone else some advice, I would say if it's your first campaign, do 40-ish days, and it'll give you some time to kind of smooth out some of the details.
Right. Okay. Sounds good.
But back to your original question, it was just a really busy time, and I didn't sleep very much, and that's about it.
Okay. What was the most important aspect of managing the campaign? Do you think answering all the questions that you had coming into you, you think that was the most important part?
It's an incredible volume of questions. I'd say I probably got 20 or 30 questions a day consistently, and up to 50 or 60 during the peak days, and just really fascinating questions. It wasn't even a hassle to answer them. I just really loved talking with people and seeing what kind of advice they had. There were a lot of repetitive questions like, why did the product do this, or why doesn't it do this? And so I answered those in the FAQ, which was helpful.
Right.
But towards the beginning, like, I remember like I launched the product and I didn't sleep for like the first night because questions were coming in, and I was so flattered that people were interested in it, that I just spent all night replying to stuff and in really great detail. I would send like page-long replies to like even the most casual questions because I was just so excited about it.
Right.
And then after a while, that you don't have time to do that anymore, and you have to kind of streamline the response process. So, really, answering questions is the most time-consuming, but it's also the most rewarding and the most beneficial. So that's something you really shouldn't ignore.
Okay. Now, did you by any chance notice that there were in the comments section that there's people that started kind of backing you up and maybe like answering questions for you that people had? Were there any of those people as well?
Yeah. I think that once people pledge to the project, they kind of feel like they're a part of it, which is exactly what has happened. You know, they by backing a project, you have become a part of that development cycle. And so
Right.
certainly a lot of people would answer questions for me, especially campaign-related stuff like how do I buy multiples or how do I change my pledge, that kind of just management type stuff. But yeah, it was great to have.
Okay, and then going into the campaign, I imagine you had like a list of friends and family who you wanted to have contribute or who wanted to contribute money to your campaign, and maybe they weren't too familiar with Kickstarter and how the whole pledging system works. Did you find that they might have had more trouble than you wish they had in registering on Kickstarter and contributing money to your campaign?
Mm-hmm. So regarding the friends and family, I tried to kind of wait a while to share it with them because probably just out of my own self-consciousness, I didn't want to have a project that failed. So I kind of waited for a while to make sure that it had gotten some traction, and then I started sending it around, not to request pledges, but just to say, hey, like this is what I've been working on for the last couple months if you've been wondering, and maybe if you have some friends who are into cycling, share it with them. The Kickstarter point, though, is interesting. I went through all the backers, and I found that I'd say 80 or 90% of them had backed another project for mine, which shows that it really is a high barrier to entry to have a project on Kickstarter. Somebody who wants to buy it and hasn't used the site before, they have to go through the registration process. They have to set up their Amazon Payments account. They have to become familiar with, hey, like you probably are going to get this thing in a couple months, depending on what the delivery date is. But on the other hand, a bunch of pledges come from internally from the site, and it's really kind of a trade-off. You need to ask yourself if your project is something that matches the Kickstarter aesthetic, which is kind of something that's trendy enough to be appealing to the crowd that's on there, but also something that can be manufactured and distributed to a wider audience as well.
Right. So as far as the date when people should expect to receive your project, I believe you set yours for actually March 2014, right? Which is a few months down the road. And typically when we look at Kickstarter campaigns, a lot of them, they kind of set the impression that they're going to be shipping out maybe like next month, the month after it ends. Why did you decide to make yours, so far down the road?
So mine is actually just in line with most hardware projects of this type of scale. Something that involves a circuit board and a housing and some packaging. Honestly, that's the amount of time it takes to do something like this. Right now, I'm working on getting the circuit board manufactured in quantity. So I already have the design done, but it just takes a lot of time talking back and forth with vendors and figuring out exactly how you want it made. And then the mechanicals, the housings also take a bunch of different revisions. So the duration was something that I wanted to be upfront about. A lot of projects, I think, try and appeal to a wider audience by saying we're going to ship this like next month.
Right.
And unless you already have all your stuff made, you're not going to ship within a month or two because you still need to, collect survey responses. You need to do shipping. You need to get the stuff packaged. So it's just, you have to be reasonable with yourself and really have experience in manufacturing to know how long something is going to take to make.
Yeah, I think your backers will be appreciative of the fact that you were realistic with the estimate.
Right, and I certainly didn't want just to mislead anyone into thinking that this was going to be a short-term thing.
Right.
So I'm going to try as hard as I can to deliver on that schedule.
Now, you also mentioned a very interesting point, is that you, once the campaign started and you started picking up traction, started getting bombarded with a lot of different offers. What were some of those offers besides, manufacturers offering you to produce your T-shirts? Were there any other ones that actually added real value?
I read a really interesting article. I think it was in The Atlantic or one of these magazines that said that the Kickstarter has created its own little world of hobbyist type manufacturing, but there's this whole other world, mostly in Asia, of companies that will solicit project creators and say, hey, we can make this thing for you. Check out these pictures of our machine shop and check out these other projects that we have fulfilled, which is really interesting. People will come to you with a list of projects that you've already heard of and say, we made this thing and we can make yours too, which is kind of interesting. So that's all right. I mean, that's good, but honestly, you should already have your suppliers lined up prior to the project. But as far as people who contributed and added value, there were tons of individuals who said, I've been involved in an in-run accident. I've been a cyclist for so many years. I've been, I'm a parent of someone who rides or a significant other. And I just wanted to provide my support. And by the way, I also run a bike shop, and I'd be happy to get your project covered in our local cycling community. Or, by the way, I'm a reporter, and I'd be happy to do an article about it, that kind of stuff. So
wow, it's awesome.
Are really, yeah, it was really flattering, and in general, people are really good about reaching out and providing help.
Okay, great. So your campaign ended 2 weeks ago. You took some time off. You had the race out in the desert, and
yeah.
What now? What are your next steps?
Yeah. So right now I'm fully entrenched in getting the boards made. The circuit board is the most important part of the project. It basically drives the kinds of features that it has. I've been adding a lot of features that people have suggested.
Okay. So you're adding features as well?
Details some modifications that people requested that I was able to add, which is really cool. I'll get those made, and then I'll move into getting the housings made. I'll probably start visiting manufacturers and going around and just spending a lot of time on site to make sure that things are being made correctly.
Will it be manufactured in the United States?
Everything except for the circuit board will be made in Los Angeles, actually.
Okay.
It's just impossible to get circuit boards made in high volume in the U.S. at anything close to a reasonable price. At my work right now, we do a lot of low volume circuit boards and quick turnaround, just because the funds are there, and things are just so much more expensive to do here in the States that and honestly, quality in places like Taiwan and Shenzhen and China are just higher in general. So it's a win-win. Yeah.
Interesting. So, wrapping up the interview, what do you see yourself going as far as Rideye? Where do you see the company going?
It's interesting because this is kind of a personal struggle for myself, because I love my job right now, but I also want to see this grow into something significant. I'd love to have a booth at some of the big bike trade shows next year and really, make more people aware of it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to try, for now, to be completely honest, I'm going to try and do as much as I can in my spare time, but as soon as it gets to the point where I'm having to make sacrifices sacrifices for Rideye, I'm going to take it full time.
Interesting. And then you also plan on hiring the electrical engineer as well, right?
Possibly. That's something where if I find that I'm having to, again, if there's something that I can't do myself, I'll bring in some extra help just on a short-term basis.
Okay, great. If you were to change anything about the crowdfunding experience or your particular crowdfunding experience, going back on it, besides, the additional maybe a few days that you would have wanted, is there anything else you would have done differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a bunch of projects that you can tell are going to make a ton of money on Kickstarter and then maybe kind of taper off after that. And I hope that I'm in the category that's kind of the opposite of that. I hope that I had a modest campaign with a really strong interest from external sources that I'll be able to grow beyond this campaign.
Right.
So you have to ask yourself, am I the kind of project who just wants to make have a lot of backers during the campaign and then just fulfill them and be done with it? And in that case, you need to spend a ton of time on the video, on the pre-campaign advertising is also really important, that kind of stuff. But if you have a solid project that you think is viable externally and more than just a Kickstarter project, then the campaign is important to get it started. But you should really focus on just making a high-quality product,
Right.
And the rest will follow.
Right. The rest will translate into the success of your campaign, and then hopefully later on the success of your business.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much, Cedric, for sharing all this information with us. It's been a real pleasure interviewing you, and you have a really earnest way of describing the Kickstarter process. And we wish you the best of luck with your business.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for talking to me. It was great.
Thank you. Okay.